Welcome to the Heart of Business podcast, sponsored by International Facilitators Organization, the marketplace for facilitators. I'm your host, Mo Fatalbab, and today I'm very excited to have with us Brad Feld. Brad is a renowned American entrepreneur and early stage investor, a 9-time author, co-founder of Foundry, a venture capital firm based in Boulder. And what I most remember about Brad from probably 1991, when he was running a little IT company called Feld Technologies, is my favorite quote of Brad's, which is, "Everybody in this industry sucks. Our goal is to suck less." Welcome, Brad.
Thanks, Mo. It's kind of amazing how that line has continued to persist. And it's very funny every time I see somebody that uses the tagline, "We suck less," that's public. Somebody sends me an email and says, "Isn't that yours?"
Right? Amazing. So if I remember correctly, Brad, at the time, Feld Technologies, when you first joined the Young Entrepreneurs Organization before they changed the name to the Entrepreneurs Organization, you were doing maybe $1 million or $2 million when we met, something like that?
Yeah, it was a little business. It was self-funded. We never raised any money. I had a partner, a guy named Dave Jilk. And, we just built it systematically every year. We did one primary thing and then a secondary thing. The primary thing was we wrote software for businesses to use to help run their businesses. This is the late 80s, early 90s, back before there were networks, back before the web and the internet, even really back before client-server databases. So the sort of using PCs to run your business was pretty shaky back then because the software technology and the hardware technology was pretty fragile. So that was the primary thing we did. And the secondary thing we did was there were a bunch of companies that theoretically provided all the hardware infrastructure. So they'd sell the hardware and they kind of set up the hardware. And to the extent that networks existed, we used these things called Novell networks for people that are old like us. And they'd wire them up and they'd use actual physical cable inside office buildings to connect the computers together. And that's where the "we suck less" line came from. I mean, those people were terrible. And so we would always be the ones that were responsible for it, even though we didn't put that stuff in. So at some point we said, you know what, we're going to be responsible for this stuff too. And so we started doing what became called network integration. But it was putting the PCs on people's desks and connecting everything together and just making sure it all worked so that then the software that we wrote for companies to automate their businesses would work.
All right. And that was not your first business, was it?
No, it was not. The first couple of companies I did failed. So I started a company with a couple of college friends. We were freshmen. Yeah, we were all freshmen except for one, who was Dave, who became my partner at Feld Technologies. And we started a company called Martingale Software. And the original idea was to write software for this new computer that had not yet come out yet. It's called a Mac or Macintosh. And to write software for that computer, you had to write it on a thing called a Lisa, which was Apple's product that some people may remember. And then you'd have to do 100 disk swaps to put it on the little disks for the Macintosh. And then you put it in the Macintosh and it would start running and take a little while. And then a little bomb would show up in the middle of the Macintosh screen because the program would crash. That was how you wrote software for the Mac at the beginning. Terrible. And we were going to write a piece of software that allowed you to type in numbers into a grid, and it would then generate a graph from the grid. And so we started doing this, and we were all in college, so we had plenty of other stuff to do. And of course, when the Macintosh actually shipped, there was this product that shipped with it called Excel that Microsoft made, where it had a grid, a spreadsheet, and you type numbers into it, it made graph. We're like, all right, well, that didn't work. And then I did another company with a guy that was a client of a company that I had worked for in the oil and gas industry. And we did a company called DataVision, and that company built a piece of software to do cephalographic analysis. And if you're wondering what is cephalographic analysis, the answer is everybody else was too. We had one customer, he got the software for free because he was the one who told us about this thing called cephalographic analysis that was going to be really important. It was a way to do facial reconstruction surgery.
Oh.
And the way they did it at the time was they took an X-ray and a ruler and they drew lines on it and figured out the angles and decided where to move the stuff on your face around. And we effectively automated that. So you scan the X-ray into a computer on a high-res monitor. There was a special monitor at the time. And you would put little points on the monitor and it would automatically calculate stuff. And so he was in today's language, he would be our design partner. And so it was a doctor at LSU, Louisiana State University. Remember, nice guy. I visited him a few times. And we wrote this pretty cool piece of software that then nobody bought.
Oh.
And so that company went out of business a year or so later. And by that point, I had already, I'm still in school at the time, and I now have a couple of other clients that I'm doing this kind of software for, littler projects while I'm in school. And I just decided, okay, well, you know what, I'm just going to do this by myself. And that became Feld Technologies. And then when in 1987, Dave Jill, my partner, joined me, and the two of us really sort of marked that as the beginning of the company for real.
Yeah.
I think so. By the time we'd met, we probably had 15 employees, and it was between $1 million and $1.5 million in revenue.
Yeah. And what inspired you to pursue entrepreneurship in the first place?
I never really thought of it. It was never really a conscious choice. So in high school, well, even I go back further, when I was bar mitzvahed, I got an Apple II computer for my bar mitzvah. So at the time, all of my friends, when they would get bar mitzvah, that era, they would get Krugerrands. That was kind of like the fancy gift. And, you get lots of the silly little things, a pen and whatever. But like Krugerrands were what everybody wanted. And I'd been exposed to computers a couple of years earlier, a year or two earlier, by my dad's younger brother, a guy named Charlie Feld, who I still to this day call Uncle Charlie. He was the head of data processing at Frito-Lay. I grew up in Dallas. Frito was headquartered in Dallas. And today, the head of data processing would be called the chief information officer. But at the time, they didn't have a title like that. Charlie was one of the half a dozen people or so that created that profession. And he would take me down to a data center in downtown Dallas. That was a Frito-Lay data center. And I'd just sit in front of a terminal all day and just play around. And that was kind of my introduction to computers. And I just loved it. It just completely absorbed me. And so when I got bar mitzvahed, my dad said, "What do you want?" And I said, I want to get a computer. A computer? Okay, well, let's go figure out what computer to get you. And we ended up getting an Apple II computer. It was a very early Apple II computer. So it only had 48K of memory, not 64K of memory. They had this thing called an integer card that gave you extra memory. It didn't have disk drives. It just had cassette tape. It was really at the very beginning. And that was kind of my introduction. So between my dad and Charlie, very early on, there was this encouragement around it. So I'd write little pieces of software on the Apple II. I did a little checkbook manager for my dad and, some other things like that. And my junior or senior year of high school, I can't remember which, my father introduced me to one of his patients, a guy named Eugene Scott. And Mr. Scott was a wonderful guy. He had been a head of sales for a couple of the mini computer software companies, and some very famous, well-known ones. And there's a guy named Sam Wiley that had created in Dallas, Texas, this very large company that eventually became part of, or the core of, Computer Associates, what became Computer Associates. And Mr. Scott would have lunch with me for a couple of hours. And he'd just sort of regale me with stories from what he was doing in the computer industry. And he and his son, David, had started a company called Scott Instruments. And they made a product called the VET-20. VET stands for Voice Entry Terminal. So imagine a thing you put on your head with a big microphone. You talk to it, and it connected to an Apple II. and it allowed you to talk to the Apple II, and the Apple II recognized your speech. So think of it as what Siri is today, or what we fantasize Siri would be if Siri got things right all the time. And this was the very first of that kind of technology. So they'd effectively, and I said David, his name was Brian, not David, Scott. So they effectively had invented this technology. And so they had an office, maybe 50 employees. And I would go to their office and hang out, and they made their own circuit boards, and they wrote all the software. And like this idea of creating it myself, creating it from nothing, was embedded at that point in time. And then the last sort of experience like that was between my senior year in high school and my first year in college, I worked for a company called Petcom. Chris and Helena Aves were the founders, husband and wife, and they wrote software for the oil and gas industry. So in the early 80s in Dallas, Texas, oil and gas was booming.
Yeah.
And everybody was exploring, digging holes in the ground, trying to find oil. And Chris and Helena came up with a couple of software product ideas. Chris wrote some of it. He wrote a bunch of accounting software. He used to be an accountant. So he wrote a bunch of software on the IBM PC for keeping track of all of this. And I wrote two products for them. One that did something called well logging, analyzing the exploration, and the other called PC Economics, which was like an economic forecasting tool for, you put a bunch of assumptions in, it would tell you over the next 20 years, what your cash flows from this theoretical thing you were going to dig in the ground was going to create. And among other things, they were magnificent. I was their first employee. They grew that company to about 20 people before the oil and gas boom crashed and all their customers went out of business. But I learned two things from them. One, they paid me $10 an hour, but they paid me per hour. So if I worked 80 hours a week, I got paid twice as much as if I worked 40 hours a week. That was kind of easy, but cool. The other, I didn't know what equity was, but they paid me 5% royalty. In the oil and gas industry, royalties were what you got. They paid me 5% royalty on all the software I wrote that they sold. So when I was a freshman in college, I'd get a check in the mail, and the check would have the number of hours I'd worked part-time for them during college, times 10, and then a random number of the royalties that I'd get, and they would always substantiate it with a little letter. And, I get, $1,500 one month. Another month I get $2,500. One month I got a little bit over $10,000, which was a mind-blowing check to get as a freshman in college.
Yeah.
And I remember taking I lived in a fraternity with about 60 people total. I took my other 59 friends to dinner at the Chinese restaurant across the street, and I paid for dinner, and I still had $8,000 left. Right. So very early on, I learned this notion. I had these experiences with people that were entrepreneurial, that were creating things from their own sort of starting point. And I saw the ups and downs of it, but I just never thought of any other thing. I never thought of getting a job after that.
Yeah. So Feld Technologies, back to Feld Technologies. How long was that business running, and what was the culmination, so to speak? Did you sell it? Did you shut it down? Tell us the story.
Well, we ran it for 7 years, and in that time period is when I first intersected with you. And so I'll sort of break it into two time periods. One was pre YEO, Vern Harnish, and Mo, and the second was post. The end was in about year 7, 1993. We sold it to a public company. That was a public company that was growing, a little public company growing very fast through acquisition. The co-chair of that company were Len Fassler and Jerry Pock, two people who had an amazing impact on me. Len, who I talked about deeply in Give First, is the person who I really sort of learned the most from in terms of how to be in business. Jerry, I learned a lot from as well. And so both of them were incredible mentors for me. But that was a culmination of the business. And then I went on and worked with them for a couple of years. As they bought more companies, I ended up being the technical guy on the deal team. I didn't know anything about deals, but I worked with them, helping them buy companies, essentially helping evaluate companies from a technical perspective, not really buy the companies, but be part of that team. but I was sort of sitting at their side as they were doing these deals. And I also made a bunch of angel investments. I made about 40 angel investments with the money I made from the sale of the company between 1994 and 1996, right at the beginning of the rise of the commercial internet. So I learned how to buy and sell companies, and I learned how to make investments in that time period. But the first half of Feld Technologies, from about 1987 to 1990-ish, 90 or 91, I can't remember, I would describe as extremely lonely. Dave and I didn't really have any peers. Like, we had clients who had their own businesses because our clients ranged from small to big companies. But we definitely had, they were different. They were 40, 50 years old. We were in Boston, so they'd been running these businesses for a long. They just didn't feel like our peers, our people. We would learn from them, but it was always a client relationship, right? We wanted to always make sure that they were happy as a client. So, what can you share with them really about the stresses of being a startup? And we didn't even have the language for it. We didn't know what we were. We were just creating a company. As we hired people, we knew nothing. We kind of figured it all out on our own, but it was us figuring it out by making mistakes. And it must have been 1990. I had this amazing experience. The only information available to us now, and for somebody in 2025 that's in their 20s, you have to time travel back. There was no online anything. Mm-hmm. The only real physical magazine that had any utility for us at the time, and Dave wasn't even interested in, he liked to read Forbes and Fortune and things about big businesses and that sort of stuff. And he was fascinated by that. I read that, but I was less interested. I read a magazine called Inc. magazine.
Yeah.
And it was the only thing that existed for people that were running small little companies. And I read it religiously every month when it showed up. But it felt very unattainable, right? It was stuff that felt like that's like when we grow up and build something meaningful, maybe we'll be one of those people. And I see an advertisement in Inc. magazine for this thing called Birthing of Giants.
Oh, yeah.
And it has a bunch of requirements. You have to be under 40. You have to be a founder of a company, and you have to have more than $1 million in revenue. And I qualified for the first two of those three, but I didn't qualify for the third. We had like 950,000 in revenue. And I'm a goody two shoes, and I'm too honest for my own good, in those situations. So like I wrote, whatever the exact number was, I wrote that number in the blank for how much revenue we had. And I sent it in hoping I'd get in. We got in. Years later, I learned from Vern Harnish. I said, Vern, we were talking, I didn't have $1 million in revenue. He said, Brad, we let everybody in that was even close. Like, okay, cool. So I go to this thing. It's a 4-day thing in outside of Boston at MIT Endicott House. It's sponsored by Inc. magazine, MIT Enterprise Forum, which I knew, and that's a key word, Enterprise Forum, not MIT Entrepreneurship Forum, MIT Enterprise Forum. So again, the language didn't exist. And then this thing called Young Entrepreneurs Organization. And I go, and I have a mind-blowing 4 days. Mind-blowing. Absolutely, completely transformative. I'm all of a sudden, there's about 60 people again, like in my fraternity. I'm with 59 people that are my peers. Now, I'm one of the smallest companies there, and I'm one of the youngest people there. And there's some people that go on, to be amazing. Ted Leonsis is one that people may know the name of. He was running a little company called Redgate Communications at the time that AOL acquired, and he went on to be Steve Case's partner at AOL. But, he was there as a guy named, what was Mark's last name from Daymark?
Oh, Mark Cohen.
Mark Cohen was there, and he had this huge catalog business and a bunch of other people, right? And so there all this collection of interesting people, and we had, 4 days that was not 4 days of partying. It was 4 days of in classroom, sort of intense with other more experienced entrepreneurs telling their stories, a couple of academic things, a couple of, roundtable-y type things, and then lots of hanging out, where the hanging out again was, we were at this sort of MIT retreat thing. So it wasn't like a party thing. It was like hanging out late at night, talking about your woes of your business. Charles, I found my people. Yeah. I'm like, wow. Right. And that was like, boom. I went back to Boston, And I told Dave, and he's like, yeah, sounds interesting. He was never really that interested in stuff like that. And I'd heard of this thing, right? It was one of the co-sponsors, Young Entrepreneurs Organization. And I think at the time I joined immediately. I think I was like the 100th person. It was tiny,
It was tiny.
tiny.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm going to start a Boston chapter. And so I started a Boston chapter. And all of a sudden, but with a little help from a couple of other people, all of a sudden we had a Boston chapter with 10 or 15 people that then became 20 and 30 and 40 and 50. I ended up getting very involved with YEO at a board level as YEO was going up on this very rapid ascent.
Yeah.
I got linked into Cohen Foundation through something at MIT with somebody named Jana Matthews, who's a longtime friend now. And Jana linked into YO, loved it because she at the time Kaufman, which was doing a lot of stuff around entrepreneurship, it was all small business, and they really weren't doing anything around this category of what we started talking about as high growth entrepreneurs. So, like all of these things, this is now the second half of my Feld Technologies experiences. I now have Peer Group, I have YO, I have these activities that are, for me, a little stressful financially because like traveling someplace, on a company we're making money every month. So, we're doing fine and I'm making a decent amount of money, but I'm still thinking about money in terms of the trade-offs. But like it was an easy decision to invest in those things because it ended up being invest in me. And there was the profound intersection at the time that I had with you, which I think became the foundation of so much of how I think about mentorship, which was as we started the Boston chapter, okay, Brad, you're now the president or the head of the Boston chapter, whatever it was. Here's the things you got to do. Number one, blah, 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 blah. Number two, create a forum group. What's a forum group? Okay, here's what a forum group is. Okay, that sounds kind of cool. And in the context of what's a forum group, okay, now you have to do forum training.
Yeah.
And so there are about 10 of us, a dozen of us, I can't remember. I'm trying to think of the people. Steve Ransom,
Mark
Mark
McNacka.
McNacka was one.
Yeah. Rich Kivel, maybe.
Rich Kivel for sure was one.
Yeah.
So like there's these groups, and these are new people to me too. They're not people I know already. And we go and we go on a retreat somewhere, and it's a 3-day thing. And all of us, like as we're sort of, and this is pre-email, right? So we're calling each other, coordinating, and everybody's like, I don't have 3 days. I don't have a long weekend. What are we doing? What is this thing? Who's this Mo guy? And we go, and we have this, I can't remember, it was in an old building, sort of in
Cape Cod, I think.
Cape Cod somewhere. I don't remember. It was cold. It was in the winter.
Cool. Yeah.
And it was amazing. And you have this moment as a young person, for me, as a young person who has been alone, it's now starting to find, again, my people, other founders, other entrepreneurs, other people struggling with the same thing. Some people further along than me, some people at the same place as me, but all of us feeling like we're peers together. Nobody rating, nobody saying, how big is your business and how much money are you making? We tell each other this stuff. Like, it doesn't matter. It's part of getting to know each other. Not, and here's how I'm doing, and none of this, I'm killing it kind of crap. It's like, let's start with all the things that are totally fucked up and that I'm feeling stress about professionally and personally. And you come out of this and you're like, I'm just not alone. And then that sets off this arc over a long period of time. I really had an amazing experience in Boston. I moved to Boulder, Colorado in 1995. I sold the business in 93. Amy, my wife, told me 2 months before I turned 30, which was December 95, that she was moving to Boulder and I could come with her. We were married, so that was really kind of like an intelligence test, I suppose. And we moved to Boulder, and ironically, I only knew one person in Boulder at the time, and that was Vern Harnish, and he moved away 6 months later, or something like that.
Yeah.
And I didn't move to Boulder because of Vern. In fact, I hadn't really connected that Vern was in Boulder until we had moved, and then somehow the two of us were talking about something. It's like, oh, I'm here too, and then get together. And then sort of from that, I didn't know anybody. So how, what's the strategy for getting to know people when you move someplace you don't know anybody? Well, I'll start the YEO Colorado chapter. So I started that, and this same kind of experience with like having a forum group and finding people and then sort of building these networks. Those experiences were part of the foundational thing for me about building networks and the power of networks and how that works alongside this construct of this really magical thing around mentorship called peer mentorship,
Yeah.
which I give to you. Like I learned that from you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And what a pleasure and what an honor and what a long time it's been that we've been doing this. So, for those people that don't know what a forum is, Brad, can you, in your words, talk about what it is, how it connects to peer mentorship? What are some of the, key principles that make it work effectively, from your view?
Yeah. So it's evolved over time, and I think gotten more robust over time as I talk to EOers today about how forum works. When we did it, I think the base is the same. It's a once a month, 3-hour meeting. It's not social. Generally, we would do it at someone's office, and you'd rotate around, so you'd see different people's offices. It was structured, so it was important that you always attend and you be on time and you be available for the entire 3 hours. That was the ground rules. And I think in each of my forums, we allowed people to have once a year you could miss, but you had to say in advance you were going to miss. And if you missed twice, you're out of form. So it was pretty strict, like you really have to be there and show up. And in both of my forums, people really adhered to that. And as over time you'd allow people to dial in, we didn't have video conferencing, but you let somebody dial in on the phone if it was really like they had a good reason. The 3 hours tended to be structured. The first part of it was updates, and you would each sit and you'd go around the room and you give personal and professional updates, and you talk about highs and lows, and you just talk, and you had to actually describe what was going on. It wasn't like bullet point list, but like, here's the professional positive, high. And I remember when we started, I can't remember if this was always the way we did it, but when we started, everybody had a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And you filled it out for a few minutes on the piece of paper. So you had your starting point for the first 5 minutes everybody wrote versus you're just talking off the top of your head. And then you go through highs, lows, personal, professional. And then generally, like there was some summation. Go around the room and everybody would listen to each other. Don't give feedback. Don't comment. Just listen and really with attention. Then we generally from that somebody would say, I would like to go deep as they're going around the room, say, I'd like to go deeper on this issue. And it could be a professional issue or a personal issue. It could be a high or a low. It could be some combination of things. And oftentimes one person, by the time you get around the room, one person would have said that, maybe sometimes two. And we decide between one and two to then run a process. And this is the other half of forms. So maybe what I just described consumes an hour. So the other 2 hours, you start, the person that is now the presenter describes their problem. Or their issue. It doesn't need to be a problem, whatever they want to think through. And sometimes it would be, I've got an offer for the business, I'm having trouble with my relationship, I've got a problematic employee, I'm super depressed and bored. My mother is driving me batshit crazy because of this, that, or the other. It could be anything. And the person would just present. And they'd talk about what the issue was in their own words. They'd go deep on it, and they'd have about up to 30, depending on it, 15 to 30 minutes to explain. And, people would often, with just the explanation, as they get deeper and deeper into it, get emotional about it. And again, you just sit and listen. No interaction, no questions, no anything, but really attentive. The end of that, each person would then, and then you wouldn't go around the room person by person, but each person could talk about things from their own experience that related to what they just heard. And what they would do from their own experience is not say, I think you should do this, but instead, here's an experience I had that's like this part of what you're describing. It doesn't have to be the whole. Or I don't know if this fits, but when you were talking about this, it made me think of this experience I had. So always, again, framing it from my experience. And then, that's the last part. Before that part, then you have, the second part was a Q&A. So the person presents, and then the room, after listening, asks questions. And the questions can be any kind of questions around the context. So it's leading questions to draw more out from the person. That then leads to the from my experience part. And the interesting thing about that was, and when I reflect on some, it was making me think of one very poignant moment in one of my Colorado forums. The thing the person was describing, on the surface, it would feel like nobody would have had that experience. But the questions people asked caused people to realize that the experience the person was having had little to do with the thing they were describing. And so almost everybody had a completely different life experience that related to the experience, but wouldn't have come out without the questions.
Yeah.
And then at the end, the person who's the presenter has a chance to kind of go around and address each person in a, whatever way they want. It could be appreciation. It could be, empathy around something. It could be a specific statement around something. So that was the long arc. Person presents, questions, go around the room. Each person can talk from their own experience. And what I found, I did Boston Forum for 3 years, and then I did the Colorado Forum for like 7 or 8 years, maybe more than that, 8 years, let's say. The level of emotional intimacy that gets created within the first 3 or 4 meetings is beyond any other relationships I have with anybody other than my business partner, Dave, and my wife, Amy. And so all this, and this is not all of YO, this is just your forum group. So, in Colorado, we had 2 forums at the beginning. Forum 1 was my forum. I can't remember what the other forum group name was called. And then over time, 100 people, you probably have 10 or 15 forum groups, it kind of continues to grow and evolve. But that level of emotional intimacy between people at different points in their experiences, but all overlapping in under 40, founder of company, more than $1 million in revenue, ended up creating a way to engage with other people that was unlike anything I had done before, and has turned into a way to engage with people, especially now, I'm almost 60. I'd like to think that many of the founders that I invest in, I can engage with them in those ways if they are interested. I don't have to, they don't have to, but I'm obviously attracted to founders who have that way of being. And, one of the things in several of the larger networks that I've been involved in, Techstars being one of them, you see that in lots of places. It doesn't have to be with every single person, but in lots of areas where that sort of emotional intimacy is part of the fabric of the relationship.
Absolutely.
Did I describe form pretty well?
Beautiful. The one piece I would love for you to touch on, because I think it also ties into your work with your new book, Give First, about mentorship. I want you to touch on the importance of speaking from experience as it relates to creating that equality.
Well, it's profound. I think it's obvious in hindsight, but unfortunately for so many people, it's not intuitive. And it's also a little hard from an ego perspective, right? We all have egos. You can modulate your ego in different ways. And, the ego that sits on my shoulder, sometimes I look at my ego and tell my ego to fuck off and leave me alone. Right? Because, when you make ego-driven decisions, a lot of times, not good decisions. In this context, this idea, if you take the 2 ends of the spectrum, one is, I've had whatever experiences I've had, lots of successful experiences, lots of experience of failure, lots of different kinds of experiences over the 40 years I've been in business, in the 60 years I've been on this planet, lots of good and bad. Those experiences are ones that are mine, that I can describe. That's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, imagine, and I like to say, my father doesn't do this anymore very much, but he did it when I was a kid. And I describe it as the finger wag. And think of the politician. I think the politician that does it the most is probably Bernie Sanders, the contemporary politician, where they wag their finger at you. You should, you should, you should. This is how it should be. These declarative statements about how things should work, which might or might not be correct. But think about your emotional reaction to the you should, you should, you should, when, especially if you're an entrepreneur or a founder, if somebody's telling you you should, I mean, like, some people are obedient to that. Like, most people are like, I want to do the exact opposite. Or, their response is to immediately stop listening.
Yeah.
Or to say, you don't understand me, or you don't understand my situation. So those are the two ends of the spectrum. And what I found in this notion of engaging regardless of experience, regardless of any attribute, pick your attribute, just throw it out the window. In terms of engaging with someone, if you can talk to them from your experience rather than directing them what to do, telling them what the answer is, it's not dissimilar to a management technique that, if anybody's listening that's ever managed a team, if you're trying to get a team done, to get something done that's really hard in some compressed period of time, the worst way to do it is to tell them, you have to get this done by this day or you're fired. Now, there's some leaders that do that and are quite effective at it. But for my frame of reference, the much more effective way to do it is to get the team to commit to getting the thing done by that time. And you as the leader to say, okay, look, we got these constraints. Within these constraints, one of the hard constraints is the deadline. Like, what can we get done? And how can we get it done? And then working with the team to get the team to agree that they're going to get the thing done by that deadline. Then that team's going to be way more committed to doing the thing with high quality, to do, move heaven and earth to do it. So again, different leadership styles. My own view in this creating equality is this notion that, we're all individuals with different strengths and weaknesses. And what you're trying to do, whether you're in a peer mentor relationship, whether you're in a manager relationship, or whether you're a managee, or whether you're a mentor mentee that still has a one up, one down relationship, it's an old cliche, but you're trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And the only way to really put yourself in the other person's shoes is to try to understand the problem from their perspective. And frankly, the only way to communicate to someone when you're trying to understand the problem from their perspective is to talk from your experience with examples rather than be directive as to what the other person should do.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. And I love your perspective and your explanation for that. And it's just good to hear it from somebody else's words who's been doing this for a long time. And you believe so much in this process, you brought it to Techstars and have used it to support many of your Techstars members. Maybe speak to that for a minute, if you don't mind.
Yeah, there were two things that happened early in Techstars that evolved over time. One that was directly in the context of Techstars, and then one that was emerging from it. In the very first Techstars program, which we started in 2006, ran the first program in 2007 in Boulder. What David Cohen, who is the co-founder and the CEO of Techstars, had come up with this idea for this thing that we started calling an accelerator, and then pretty quickly started calling it a mentor-driven accelerator. And the reason we called it a mentor-driven accelerator, the word mentor didn't really exist in the fabric of entrepreneurship much then. It would pop up every now and then, but it wasn't really the word. And what we said is, look, we're going to get a bunch of people in the Boulder and Denver region who were, founders or worked with founders and service providers, or maybe were investors. And we're going to surround these founders for 90 days, which was the length of the accelerator program, with these mentors. We're going to call them mentors, and the mentors are going to spend time with no commitment of any sort other than willingness to spend time with these founders. There's no quid pro quo. There was no definition. There was no economics. It was just going to be interesting. We'll see what happens. And when we were recruiting the mentors, and many of them were people I knew, and some of them were from the East Coast or the West Coast and would travel to Boulder. And the way I would entice them to come to Boulder, I say, look, if you come to Boulder, in addition to doing this Techstars thing with us, I'll have dinner with you. And if you want me to, wander you around town the next day and introduce you to a bunch of folks, happy to do that. So it was a way to kind of get people to come to town. But people were like, no, it sounds like a fun summer, Boulder. Awesome. Let's do it. In the first couple of years, we didn't really know what mentorship was, but we pretty quickly started seeing things that were effective and things that weren't effective. And of course, many of these things tied back to form, because I was already doing form. I had this intuition about sort of the dynamics around these things. It was sort of already in my head. And so we started talking, and of course, David and I were doing a lot of the mentorship with the individual companies as well. And then, of course, a lot of the people you'd be spending time with who are mentors, you'd also be doing mentor-like conversations about their business or about, where Techstars was going to evolve, or at this point we had raised Foundry's first fund and sort of what was going on with it. You'd have those same kind of peer mentor conversations in these contexts one-on-one. By about the fourth year, we now had done 10 programs. We were in a couple of different cities. And we'd really learned, I think, a decent amount about what was effective versus not. And David wrote very quickly this thing called the Techstars Mentor Manifesto. It was 18 bullet points. It wasn't rules. It was not, and if you do these things, you will be a good mentor and get a check mark. It was not that. It was one-liners that were ideas for people to think about in the context of mentoring. And those one-liners, when I wrote Give First, I organized part 2 of the book around those one-liners. They really hold up well. And they don't hold up well of do these and you will be a good mentor. They hold up well. And if you think hard about this kind of abstract idea, it can help you be more effective. And if you think about it and kind of don't do it, you're probably going to be less effective. And so that part of the book is fleshing those out from my own experience, right? So describing the one-liners with more depth, and sort of talking about them with more depth intellectually, but then using experiences that I'd had that reflected that one-liner. So that was one construct. The other construct was this phrase, give first, which is a philosophy, not a religion. It's something to think about and to incorporate into your way of being. It's not what you should spend 100% of your energy on, but it's a part of the way that one operates. And it's a set of ideas around it. And the definition is very simple. It's that you're willing to put energy into a system without knowing what you're going to get back. You don't define the transaction up front. It's not altruism. You expect to get something back. You just don't know from whom, over what time period, in what form, and what consideration. And by 2012, I had written a book called Startup Communities. And that phrase didn't exist before that. And it talked about the idea of how you can create a startup community in any city in the world. And I made this assertion that any city over about 50,000 people benefited from having a startup community. And so there's this phenomena as entrepreneurship, which always existed all around the world, but now this sort of next wave of entrepreneurship started to have that. In that, Techstars was a big part of that global democratization of entrepreneurship, because it was not just running programs all over the world, but eventually started doing startup weekends all over the world and participating in startup weeks and doing things that were really global in nature. And I had this one paragraph in that book called Give Before You Get. And that paragraph, I didn't think very hard about it, but I wrote what was roughly the definition. And I was basically saying, look, if you want to really get things going, you need to be willing to give before you get. Put energy into the startup community without defining what you get from it. And in a sort of wonderful moment, about 6 months later, Adam Grant, who's a Wharton professor of organizational psychology, came out with a book called Give and Take.
Yes.
And my one paragraph was anecdotal. It was just the way I write. It was from my experience. It was things that, I'd been percolating on. Adam did like all this research that showed, basically substantiated this construct of being willing to put energy into a system without knowing what you're going to get, being a giver. And for me, it was another, mind-blowing moment of like, yep, there's some real substantiation for this. And that evolved in Techstars lingo and in value system into this idea of give first, being willing to put energy into things without knowing what you're going to get back.
I love it. Two quick questions before we say goodbye. Brad Feld, the first, your storied career, you've done many, many amazing things. You look back, what are you most proud of?
I don't think I'm most proud of a singular thing. I think I'm most proud, I hadn't thought of it this way, in reflecting on how I feel about how I've engaged with so many people. And I feel like I attribute that to Len Fassler, in that at Len passed a few years ago. Len and I were incredibly close friends and stayed close through the end of his life, even when we weren't working together. And what I saw in Len was just this great joy in how he had engaged with others in good times and bad, including me. And I feel the same way. Like, of course, I have people that don't like me. Of course, I've disappointed people. Of course, I've got some broken relationships. Every human being does. And I'm okay with that. Like, I feel like that's part of life. But I am very comfortable with a wide set of ways, the way I feel about the way I've related to so many people.
Well, my next question was going to be about who's had the most impact on you. And I think Len certainly is one that came up for me as I was reading the book. I would ask this, though. He did say something that was a beautiful quote that I'd love to end with, having something to do with "they can't kill you." Can you give us 30 seconds of what that quote was?
Yeah, the book leads off with a story of a moment where I'm just in abject misery at Len's house one morning, sort of as the internet bubble is collapsing, and not just the company we were running was all fucked up, but everything in my world, of which I was on a lot of boards and made a lot of investments, was a mess. And he sort of cheerfully comes down the stairs to his kitchen. He sees immediately that I'm like hunched over the kitchen table, like looking like a sad sack that morning. He comes up to me and gives me a big hug after we talk a little bit, and he says, "Brad, they can't kill you and they can't eat you. Let's go to work."
I love it. I love it. I love it. Brad Feld, thank you so much for your time and for everything you've done for this incredible community of entrepreneurs, both in EO and at Techstars, not to mention everything else you have done. A special thanks to our audience. And as a reminder that reviews help people find our podcast, so please leave a review to help others find the show. And thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.